Hello, everybody, and welcome to Reader Meet Writer. I'm Constance Lombardo, author and illustrator of my illustrated Mr. Puffball books and of the picture book, Everybody Says Meow. All right. Our program today is brought to you by SIBA, the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance. And SIBA represents independent bookstores across the South, including the store that brought you here today. Independent bookstores are so important in bringing books and authors and exciting events into your community. We ask that you please support them by purchasing the book we're discussing today at the store that brought you here. And this is the book we're talking about today, Frankie and Bug, yay. Also, please say hello in the chat and shout out the name of your local bookstore. And also feel free to ask questions for our Q&A, which will happen at the end of the event. And today I am very happy, thrilled, I would say, to be in conversation with the award-winning author and journalist, Gayle Forman. Welcome, Gayle.
Thanks,
Gayle, hi. Gayle has written several best-selling novels and the #1 New York Times bestseller, If I Stay, which has been translated into more than 40 languages and was adapted into a major motion picture in 2014. Gayle's essays and nonfiction work have appeared in publications such as the New York Times, Elle, The Nation, and Time. And she lives in Brooklyn with her family. And I'll say it again, welcome, Gayle.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. Yay, indie booksellers.
Woo! Yay. All right, well, let's dive into our conversation. I'll start by saying I just love this novel. It was a joy to read. I love the balance of beautiful prose, humor, intensity, a really fascinating narrative arc. And it's all written with so much heart and so much compassion. One thing that stood out for me is that you do not shy away from heavy subjects, including violence, neighborhood violence, AIDS, the Vietnam War is touched upon, and even skinheads, which sort of sent a chill down my spine. And I'd like to ask you, how do you feel about tackling heavy topics for young readers? And what's the best way to present those topics?
Thank you for that. The book is set in 1987, which is sort of reason sort of Vietnam was, there were Vietnam vets when I was growing up. I knew quite a few of them. So, I started out my career as a journalist, and I worked for years at 17 magazine, and I was a senior writer there, and my job was to do an article a month. And the kinds of articles we did back then, nobody could believe that 17 magazine did, because we were doing like serious journalism. I did stories about sort of migrant teen farm workers, about behavior modification boot camps. I went to Sierra Leone to do a piece about child soldiers fighting in the Civil War. And people, and by people I mean adults, who are always like, I can't believe that you do those stories. I can't believe your readers care. And they did care. They cared deeply, because I think kids have this sense of justice and injustice. And I remember some of the stories, they would like literally send in dollar bills when they would send letters to the editor. Please help. So early on in my career, I understood like that not to underestimate this readership at all. And it's funny because we're all children at some point. We all go through the experience of people assuming that like what we say and what we feel has no validity, and we know that's not true. And yet we repeat those same mistakes. But I think from those years of working at 17 and those years of being a young adult novelist, I believe in my reader, and I have enough respect for my reader to know that they can handle the truth. Now, there's a way that you are going to tell them this truth, but they live in this world. They are not cosseted in a bubble. And you don't want to be gratuitous or triggering in the way you present things, but I think that it's validating a reality that they already know. And by showing a 10 and 11-year-old who are actively doing things, it's sort of empowering them so that they understand that even though they're like just kids, they really do have a role to play in making the world sort of more fair and just, which is something sort of Frankie and Bug sort of set out to do.
I really enjoyed that part. So, I mean, I enjoyed all the ways in which Frankie and Bug are just fighting for different things that they believe in. And you're also reminding me of how often Bug will say things like, please tell me what's going on. I'm not just a kid. Like I'm part of this. And it's really reminding me of what you just said. And it doesn't sound like she's being a mouthpiece for your ideas. It sounds very authentic, and it even kind of just reminded me of what it's like to be a kid and to feel like I'm here. I want to know, and I want to be involved. So
kids just have such a clarity about this, and I don't want to like sugarcoat and be like kids are perfect and kids are always well behaved.
Of course.
Bug is very self-absorbed, and she sort of really thinks everything is about her. She's 10. She messes up. Frankie messes up. They're little humans trying to develop into bigger humans. It's part of the process. But also, when they are sort of faced with just sort of discrimination, they see how arbitrary it is, just like how hurtful it is. There's like sort of, I don't want to give too much away, but there's a scene where Bug's aunt comes to visit, and Bug is half Salvadoran, and Frankie, I'm going to kind of reveal, I think we're going to talk about this anyhow. He's what we today would call a trans boy, but in 1987, he doesn't really have the words to describe himself, just how he is. But he knows, like, he knows what he is, but the people around him want him to be different. And when Bug's aunt Terry comes to visit, Bug sort of experiences her aunt saying some pretty not great things about her father, who's Salvadoran, and wanting Bug not to get dark in the sun. And Frankie is like, oh, so you get it, what it's like for people to be mad at you just for being you. And so there's just a clarity to that, and a clarity to the way that like the youth climate movement is going, like, this is crazy. Why are we not doing anything about it? So that's the ultimate sort of frustration of children, being like, it's not fair. This is wrong. Fix it. Why won't the adults fix it? So Bug's frustration felt very authentic to me, to how Bug would feel at age 10, and how I sometimes feel at age 51.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. All right. Well, another thing I like about this story is that there are a lot of mysteries, kind of big and small, and twists, and that everything's kind of slowly uncovered over the course of the novel. And in some way that just reminded me of When You Reach Me by Rebecca Stead, one of my favorite books.
Favorite.
Yeah. And it's so great. And I like, you hint at things in the early in the book by like, why doesn't Frankie want to go swimming? And which is kind of a red herring. I won't reveal anything either, or why won't Frankie sleep over? And by the way, yes, I noticed that Rebecca Stead blurbed your book. So that's a nice tie-in. So the beautiful complexity of your story made me wonder whether you're a plotter or a pantster, and whether someone who kind of outlines and their book, or just writes it and then goes back and does all the editing later.
Yeah, I wish I could be a plotter and then have it all mapped out. But part of it is you don't discover it until you're sort of through it. And so when the idea came to me, I knew that Frankie and Bug were, had the general ideas about them. And I knew that they were going to investigate the Midnight Marauder, who was a serial killer sort of on the loose. And I also knew that eventually sort of crime would come closer to home, and what was sort of remote and antic, like we're all obsessed with true crime because like we can really keep it at a remove, right? We don't have to really contemplate what it actually means when that happens. And when something happens, not quite as grisly, but closer to home, like it just takes on a different import. So a lot of those threads just happened with multiple revisions. So this book, as I mentioned, took a really long time for me to write. I think I started it in 2013 and I finished. Wow. I was even making changes like right before it went to print in 2021. So it was 8 years. And some of that was because I put it aside for a while. And some of that was because it took a while to find the voice of Bug. And then once I found it, I was just like, boom, channeling it. But some of that was also just like all of those threads, just figuring out how that all worked. And
Yeah, I'm a little
love Rebecca
surprised.
too, and also setting a book in the 80s. I mean, I wanted to set in the 80s. It was part of the original inspiration for the book, was sort of looking backward, but it was also, Rebecca was onto something of setting a book at a time when kids could have so much more freedom than they do now.
Yeah, that was my next question about why you decided to set it in the 1980s. I don't know if you can talk more about what that era means to you. There's a lot of reference to certain products. I think they maybe use sun tanning lotion instead of like blocking the sun, the stuff you used to rub on yourself to actually attract the sun. The cars and the music.
Yeah.
And also, you know, the setting and the beach, Venice Beach. I mean, I grew up on Long Island. I did not grow up in California, but that feeling of, please, let's go to the beach, and diving into the waves, body surfing, the lifeguard stand, and people on the boardwalk skating, and just everything you see there, and then buying ice cream. And it was really very evocative for me. And I'm wondering if the beach or Venice Beach in particular has a special meaning to you.
They all do. You know, I grew up in Southern California near Venice.
Oh.
And it is you wouldn't know it because none of my books are set there. This is the first time I've set a book there. And I grew up there. So the 80s, I was a little older than Bug, but I was growing up in the 80s and coming of age during the 80s. And that really is what was the initial inspiration for the book. Is I was just kind of thinking about how certain things had changed so drastically. So in the 80s, the AIDS crisis was sort of at its sort of apex. It was just, nobody knew what it was. It was really, really impacting gay communities. The government was either not mentioning it, or you would have people saying that this was sort of like justified. It was sort of God's revenge. It was just the most horrible thing. And I started volunteering right after I got a driver's license at AIDS Project Los Angeles, and made a lot of relationships there. And I just remember thinking, you know, how quickly things have changed for, you know, if I could go back in time and say, hey, in like 30 years, AIDS is going to basically be a curable disease in the United States, and there's going to be marriage equality and queer families all over the place. No one would have believed me. And it's hard to tell kids my own age, like how quickly things can change, because the 80s is historical fiction. And as far as they're concerned, it's like a million years ago, but it's not. It happened in our lifetime. And on the other hand, I was also looking at Bug, I kind of took her story from my best friend Isabel's from El Salvador, and her grandmother had to leave because she was a union organizer and she got in trouble with the government. And just in the 80s, there was so many people fleeing that region because there were all of these wars that were proxy wars during the Cold War, and how never would I say we've been incredibly welcoming, but more welcoming in the 80s, where there was amnesty, there was all these different programs, versus now. And when we were seeing refugees fleeing again for that destabilization caused by those same wars, and they're being locked in cages. So like, why do some things change with such breathtaking speed and other things seem to move backwards? And that was the whole reason to set that book in the 80s, because the reader today, even if they have no idea what it was like, they do know what the world looks like now. And so they can see when they read about Frankie or Philip that things have really changed for Frankie and Philip. Whereas, in other areas, maybe not so much. And sort of what is sort of all of our collective responsibility to move things forward for all of us.
That's great. I love it. And I know this isn't what you were talking about, but it just also is fun to think about kids who just have to go and talk to people and do research by having conversations or looking at books or maps or whatever, and not without the technology that we have today.
It's so much fun without the technology. And also, I thank you for mentioning that, because there's this, I think when we talk about the issues, it sounds like it's a very like heavy-handed book. And I think this book is so full of humor. These characters crack me up. the other characters in the life, Mama, Bug's mom, is great. I love her upstairs neighbor, Philip. There's Hedvig, who's a Hungarian refugee who lives downstairs. And it's just like this great, Venice is such an oddball community. And it's just like this little house, with the 3 floors of them. So then Frankie and Bug they crack me up together.
Oh, I agree. It strangely manages to feel so lighthearted and fun, even though, yeah, you're definitely talking about some very serious stuff. And I think that also kind of echoes childhood, that there are days when you're just like, I'm a kid having fun. And then other times you're like, why is the world so unjust? And yeah, I loved it. I really honestly enjoyed reading this book so much.
Well, thank you. It means a lot to me.
And I don't want to get serious again, but I have this question about that there are a lot of heartbreaking moments in the book. And one that really got to me, and I think you even just mentioned this, was when Frankie says, there's no word for what I am. And as the parent of a transgender teen myself, I think it's so vitally important for everyone to know that there have always been transgender people. And I'm wondering what kind of research you did on this subject.
Well, I know transgender people from when I was a little bit older, and I just know that if coming out as gay in the 80s, that was, people lost their families over that. People,
I know,
it was so, and I know that still happens, but I think there's such a broader acceptance and also so many more resources. The internet has really kind of brought a virtual community where people can get help. The back of the book has all kinds of that if you need that. But I think, it was, yes, there was no word for it. But of course there's always been people like Frankie. And so if that's a heartbreaking moment, one of my favorite moments in the book, which kind of came later in the revision, is when Frankie and Bug are doing some investigating, and they wind up being sort of sent to Flo, who's
when they go with the flow.
With the flow. So there's a lot of roller skating action that happens there. There's this guy called Zeus who kind of speaks in riddles, and he sends them to go with Flo. And they figure out that means Flo Rida, who's a sort of skater, fixture, roller skater on the boardwalk. And they go and they talk to Flo, and Bug's not sure if Flo is like he or she, because it looks different. And Bug finally blurts out, like, what are you? Because Frankie's like, just ask. And Flo says, oh, it depends on the day and my mood.
Yes.
But Flo is the one who really talks to them about what's going on in the gay community. And that is that there had been, a huge uptick in violence. And as I was writing this, there was trans people were really being attacked, and was seeing those parallels. But, Flo tells them about AIDS and what that means, and Flo's over people talking about the Midnight Marauder because this is happening, and she keeps referring to queers, and Bug says, what do you mean queers? Isn't that a bad word? And Flo says, I just mean like, gays, lesbians, bisexuals, transsexuals, which is what they would have said in the 80s.
Right.
All us folk, and looks at Frankie, and Bug's like, she thinks this is a big secret. And Frankie's going to be upset, and Frankie is anything but upset. He has just been seen, like,
yes,
he has just been told. And he says to Flo, you mean, there's a name for me? And Flo says, yeah, of course, and then he says, so there's other people like me. And Flo says, oh, more than you could ever imagine. And that is a lesson that I want people to take away from this book. Of any identity, any gender identity, any racial identity, I think we all deep down think there's some part of us that is like secretly unique to us, and not in a good way. It's like, if everybody knew I had this in me, they would not like me. And I am telling you, you are not alone. Your people are out there. Everybody thinks that about themselves. And I think if we were able to just be more open about it, we'd find out that that's actually not true. So that was if there's a heartbreak moment of Frankie not having a word for it, I think when Flo says there is a word for it, and there's a whole community of us, sweet boy, and you will find us. So
that was such a sweet moment. I think even earlier than that scene when Frankie first, I think it's when Frankie first sees Flo, that Frankie's sort of staring at Flo and just beaming, like you could just see the foreshadow of that's they're going to have that connection.
well, you asked me earlier about research. So I used a lot of sort of authenticity readers, and I know a lot of younger trans people right now, but I was
Mhm.
really looking for a trans man who, who was older, who would have experienced this when there wasn't such sort of a more widespread understanding of this. And he was the one who gave me such great notes. And one of the things he pointed out, and this was before I'd even written Flo into it, but just that Frankie would have a radar up for any kind of sort of gender performance that did not fit the norm. So even before Frankie sees Flo, when he sees Vanessa, who's a woman who works out at Muscle Beach is like this outdoor gym. It's an institution in Venice. All these guys are out there. And then there's Vanessa, like even that for Frankie's like,
Mhm.
I've never seen a girl like that. So
Mhm.
that was, again, something that I wouldn't necessarily have thought of, but that Frankie's radar would just be up for anybody who does not seem to be sort of like straight up cisgender performing gender and these sort of very narrow ideas of how it would have been in the 80s.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a lot to think about, and I love it. And what you were saying about how we all have that thing that's different that we think is bad, like our secret different thing, makes me think of, and I'm not going to remember the exact line, but at one point, Frankie's talking about, no, excuse me, Bug's talking about someone to her mom, and she says, "Oh, he's weird," and the mom says something like, I don't think I've ever met anyone who's not weird." And
Yeah.
do you remember the line?
I do remember that line because that's something I
Because
often
you wrote it.
say that to my kids. The day I meet somebody who's not weird, I'm going to run for the hills, right? And then the mom says, like, you know who's not weird? And this is true. People always say serial killers aren't weird when they're always say, like, oh, they seem so normal. They seem so normal. So, like, everyone's weird as far as I'm concerned.
Watch out for normal.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. All right. Well, another central idea in this book is the refugee and all the different ways in which someone can be a refugee, even within their own culture. And I'm wondering how this relates to your personal experience. So you've talked about some of the journalism you did, which obviously what really informed the book. Or also to talk about what you want readers to take away as far as the experience of being a refugee. And can I just say, I think Philip, you include Philip too as a kind of refugee because he goes to be in a place where he can be more free about who he is.
Yeah. I mean, I think when we think of refugees these days, we think of political refugees fleeing their homelands, and with incredibly high stakes. You know, it's like either leave or be killed, or leave or see terrible things happen to your family. But, you know, I was thinking of the actual meaning of the word is like refugees seeking refuge. And Hedvig, who's the downstairs neighbor, who, again, I kind of stole this story from my friend Hetty's parents. Her mother was Maria, and it was the same thing where they had been living in Budapest and the Soviet Union came and everything was terrible and they had to sneak out and defect. And so, you know, they were refugees. Mama has to leave home with Bug when Bug's a baby and Danny for reasons that you find out right at the end of the book. So I'm not going to tell you, but she's fleeing something. Philip, as a gay man in like the in the 1960s is trying to go anywhere where he can actually be himself. So they are all seeking refuge and they find each other and they become this found family. And I think that a lot of people who have found intolerance wherever they are for whatever reasons they are and have had the ability to leave and go to a place where they will be more accepted again for whatever reasons, understand that feeling of just like, okay, I have found safety here. I found safety here.
Yes, exactly. That's I was talking about my transgender team before, and we're fortunate to live in Asheville, North Carolina, which is a place that's very welcoming to, and in general, yes, things are better for transgender people than they would have been then. But, you know, finding your tribe and finding the people who you really feel safe with is so important. And I also love how it's Hedwig, right? How Hedwig's story comes out when they're going to Disneyland, and how that, it's so beautiful, and what different landmarks or places in one culture can mean to someone who's come here from another culture. Her story was so beautiful, and it's just like one moment in the book, but it just all ties in, which is
it's like a little capsule. They're driving to Disneyland, and I grew up in Southern California, and like back then, like going to Disneyland was like, it was really special, but it was also something you just kind of did in a day. Like it was, cheap enough and not crowded enough that you didn't have to like plan it with like your fast passes and all the things you have to do now. And so it was like on the ride, I got to have Hedwig give this story, which I loved. I loved her. She's the reason they're going. And she loves Disneyland, which Frankie and Bug think is like crazy because she doesn't even go on the rides. But she talks about going to Disneyland when it first opened in the 50s, and how Disneyland represented American freedom to her in the way that like the Statue of Liberty would have done for people who were coming by ship to the East Coast.
Exactly.
And so, when I wrote that story, I didn't, again, it kind of really came back in the end where I really understood that they were all kind of refugees of a sort, and they had found each other in this found family. But Hedwig's story, it was just so much fun to write, because also Bug is trying to figure out how old Philip is. Philip lives above them, and he's, like they have the keys to his apartment. They've known him forever, but he's very private about certain things. And so she can never figure it out. And he let some things slide in that chapter, like coming to America for the first time and what year it was. And Bug is like listening to the story, and she can't believe what a good story it is, but she's also trying to do the math to figure it's actually 55, which to Bug is ancient.
I know. That is so great. I just love the house that they live in, and how, the neighborhood's kind of rough, but they've all connected in this way and really made their, as you say, like a family of friends, which is just, for so many people, that's where you find your real community and your family and friends. I don't know how else to say it. Even like the way he has Philip creates the lanai, he calls it the lanai, out of the little back porch area that like abuts the parking lot or something. I mean, that's interesting too. I hadn't even thought of it that way, but that you could think of that as a kind of refuge too.
Yeah.
And
I don't want to say that found family is like, it's always because your family of origin is terrible. I think that it's great to have both. Like I live in Brooklyn. I live with my nuclear family, and our backyard connects to 3 other families, and we call it the compound. And like, we're always running back and forth, and it's like, we have each other's back, and there's this sort of feeling of like, this is also my family. And it's, it's good to have as many people sort of like holding you up as you can, and then being there for them when they need to be held up. It's a nice way to live.
Oh, absolutely. That sounds beautiful. And I like your point about not vilifying people. And even, and I know we don't want to give away too much, but even Aunt Terry, who, at first I was like, Aunt Terry, why are you like that? And then you find out something about it. It's like, oh, okay. There's, everyone has their different sides. And I love the way you don't write your characters black and white. They really have all the subtleties and the full range, as humans do.
People are complicated. I remember being a journalist, and I would interview some just like really, horrible people, at least on paper. And then they were like very nice and lovely people too. And it was like hard to wrap your mind around, but like, we contain multitudes. We are very complicated. It is much easier for like cognitive dissonance just to be like, you're one way or you're another way. And I feel this way about you, because, but that's not how people are,
Absolutely.
The person is imperfect and has flaws. And so, on Terry, I don't want to excuse her right or past. She has some really loathsome beliefs, and she said terrible things. And she also shows up for her family at a time when they need to. So
yeah, No, you're right. We can tame multitudes. That's a great way to say it. Oh, and just echoing what you said before, I agree that I think young people have a really strong sense of justice. And I really like all the references in this book to political activism on so many fronts. And I like the line when the mom says, sometimes justice takes time. And it certainly feels that way with a lot of issues that are being even discussed in our Supreme Court right now, and all over the land in many different ways, all over this country, I mean. And the mom often says, life is not fair, and all that we can hope is that it is just. And even I was like, what do we really mean by that? So I like the way Bug's always like wondering what it means. And I also just would love you to talk about how do you really differentiate between those terms?
I think what mama is thinking is like, I guess I think about it, which is something that my kids' schools talked about a long time ago, which is a difference between equality and equity, right? So sort of this fairness is the idea that like everybody gets the same thing, which in a family is not the case at all, right? Like it's not, different kids need different things. And when you're kind of looking at sort of the world, it's like, if the goal is equality, if the goal is for everybody to have the same rights, the same privileges, the same opportunities, the same protections, that's the goal. But to get there, you know, if you're like looking, some people need a little more sort of scaffolding or a little extra boost or more rights or more protections. Some people are almost already there. So that was, you know, what sort of mama was getting at, is that we're trying to get to a place of equity and sort of what justice means. And Bug doesn't understand that. Like, she's 10, and it's just one of those maddening things that parents say. But I think at the end of the book, when mama says to her, sometimes justice takes time, it's because Bug has started to understand the difference between what's fair and what's just. Like, not getting the small room is very different than Frankie having to go home and possibly be forced to be someone he's not. And so she says to mama, like, how is this fair or just? And that's when mama says justice takes time. And Bug doesn't buy that. She's like, why do grown-ups always say that? Like, don't you know how hard it is to wait? And so I think the real takeaway is that mama stops and thinks about that, because good for mama, she listens to her kids. And she says, you know what, you're right. It's up to all of us to hurry toward justice. And so I think that is something that is important, that you cannot just hope. Or if you do hope, hope has to be an active verb. It has to be doubled with some sort of action. And that can take many different forms. Frankie and Bug really step up and do some brave things to kind of step up for each other and show up for each other in all kinds of ways. But the idea that you can't just sit there and be like, oh, I really hope the world gets better. It's not going to get better unless we all really lean into it and push together.
Yes, that's true. I love the relationship between Frankie and Bug, and I love how, the idea of bravery comes up a lot, and the courage that they need. And sometimes it's the courage to just speak openly to each other, ask the difficult questions. And then in one of the biggest scenes, it's the courage for them to confront some people that I was like reading it like, oh no, getting nervous myself, and just
it was a very stupid thing to do, and I don't recommend any readers do it.
You should say that. But yeah, it is really beautiful that and that Bug really early on recognizes how brave Frankie is, and how that becomes a repeated. But yeah, and I want to say again that I feel like we're stressing sort of these serious and more sometimes slightly upsetting scenes, but it's also just fun. It's funny. You have a great sense of humor, and it was really just a thrill to read.
Lemonade stands and ice cream stands and roller
skating and the music.
Summer book, and you know, just Bugs looking at the world. And you know, we talk about the bravery, but I also, and this leads to some of the humor, is like Frankie and Bug are like constantly messing up, right? They're trying, like they're miscommunicating, they're trying to do the right thing, they're the wrong idea about it, they get into these little snits, and then they kind of talk about it, and it's messy sometimes, and then they talk about it and they learn, and they might get mad at each other and they get over it. And I really, I thought that was like, we could all learn a few things from them, because I think there's so much fear and nervousness about getting something wrong and saying the wrong thing, and they just are just like straight up about like, I don't know what to think here. And they treat each other with an amount of grace as they sort of screw up and learn. And because it's like, you don't learn without messing up, otherwise you just kind of shut down and refuse to go there. So I just think that adds to a lot of the humor, while also, I think, kind of modeling, how these kids are allies to each other.
Yeah. And yes. And for me, some of the humor was also just how often Bug is like, I mean, I love the way their friendship, it's not like they meet each other and they're like, oh, we're going to be best friends, and and it takes a while. And Bug is so often like, that's it. I'm too mad. I'm not talking to him anymore. She just goes back and forth, and she's like, well, I guess I'm going to go talk to him because I want to have this issue I want to ask him about or whatever. So it's great to see how the friendship,
Yeah,
that's
I mean,
one of the joys.
thinking. So the book opens with Bug finding out that, as far as she's concerned, summer has been canceled because her older brother, Danny, is maturing. He's spreading his wings. He wants to be called Daniel now. He doesn't want to take his kid sister to the beach, which is what they've done for the last couple of summers. And that is where Bug has her first fit about something not being fair. And then she finds out that Frankie, this nephew of her upstairs neighbor Philip, is coming, and she just assumes he's coming for her. And then he shows up at the airport, and he didn't even bring a bathing suit, and he's not interested in any of this. And so Bug tries to scare him. She's like, there's a serial killer here. And Frankie's like, yeah, I brought my map. He's a serial killer. Bug is just mystified.
The whole thing with the map and the books and the lemonade stand is like a stakeout. It's really funny. I mean, it's great.
I mean, they have fun. They have fun with their stakeout.
Yeah, and
it's their neighbor. They think that their neighbor, who's a hermit, could be the serial killer. So,
yes, I was curious about the hermit. Oh, I know, we find out a little bit about him. Well, my last question is that in your acknowledgments, you thank, and I'm quoting you, the kids who are blowing up our ideas of how gender should be performed. And I agree, that's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing that's happening with our current generation of young people. And I just wanted to ask you about your feelings. I mean, it sounds like you've written for all ages, and just to talk about what it's been like for you to write for kids, why you choose to write for kids. And it sounds like middle grade did you say you're working on another?
I am working on another, it took a while to get the voice of the middle grade, but I didn't sort of specifically set out to write a middle grade. But when this story came to me, it had to be these 10 and 11-year-olds. It had to be like a level of innocence where they see the world in these sort of very clear ways we were sort of talking about before. Just like, well, that's not nice for somebody to be mad at you just for being you. Like, that's how they feel about discrimination. Like when Bug learns a little bit more about Frankie and what he's facing at home, like she's just like, who cares how you want to be? And that is so true. Like, it doesn't cost you anything to let somebody else be the person they want to be and be the person they say they want to be. So, I think that at the same time, I've seen with my kids who were middle grade when I started writing this and are teenagers now, I've seen what their generation is doing. And I know for a lot of adults, talk about things changing quickly. Like, we're like, whoa, like I can't keep track of all the terms and what does it mean? And sometimes there can be an instinct to be like, oh, there's something wrong with that. And we don't understand it, the kids, but they are doing something incredible. I really do think I would have very much liked to grow up with fewer constraints on what being female meant. And whether taking aside like whether I want gender nonconforming, I felt constrained by what was expected of me as a girl. And so what these young people today are doing is really rejecting these ideas that they have to perform gender in any which way, and really are kind of choosing that, and are sort of saying the biological sex I was assigned at birth does not have to dictate how I am as a person. And I think the pendulum is probably sort of way here. We're seeing just so many people break out of what has been the expected norm, and I hope that there's sort of a trickle down for all of us older people, where we just sort of see a relaxing of these sort of these gender straitjackets. So good for them.
Yes, I agree. And it was 3 or 4 and maybe more years ago that, excuse me, my niece was in college, and I remember she told me, oh, in all of my classrooms, the first thing a teacher will say is like, everyone introduce yourself and tell us what pronoun you use, which is, I mean, now it's really getting to be a standard thing, but I maybe it was 4 or 5 years ago, I don't remember. At the time I was like, wow, really? That seems so progressive. But yeah, it's just part of life now for many people. Of course, there's a big reaction against it, unfortunately, but we hope that will change. But I agree with.
I think it can be uncomfortable. It's like, what do you mean you're asking me my pronouns? But like, if it's going to hurt somebody to misgender them, like, what harm is there to ask and to offer up your own, to just the acknowledgement that not everybody has to be she, her, he, him.
Exactly. All right. Well, this has been a great conversation. Let me get to at least one of these questions here. Someone asks that they would love to know if Gail has favorite characters in this book, a character that grew to be more of a presence than you originally intended, and also any favorite scenes from the book. And they say that they're enjoying our conversation.
Well, thank you. And there's a lot of good questions. Frankie and Bug are just, I had so much fun spending time with them. I finished working on this book during the pandemic, and it was just like joyful to be with these 2 kids. I love them. I really do. I just kind of want to wrap them up. I love them so much. And I think this is like the first book since If I Stay where pretty much all the characters are great characters and loving characters. One of the things about writing YA is you have to get the parents like either out of the picture, or they have to be adversarial. And so it was, or some sort of antagonist, even if they're well-meaning. It was just so nice to have them with these like incredibly loving, wonderful people. I just love spending time with all of them. So that was that. I think I have Mom, I think is great. I have a soft spot for Philip. But to your second question, Flo was a character who wasn't even there in the early draft. And I added that scene after one of my authenticity readers, and also when, it made so much sense in terms of the mystery of it all. And that scene just became such a tiny little hopeful scene there. So I love that scene. And there's also a scene where Frankie and Bug Frankie is finally gone swimming. You find out the reasons why he doesn't want to go in the water, and it's Bug's happy place, and they're having like this beautiful summer day, and they're just talking about all kinds of stuff and realizing that like they're best friends. And Bug has this realization that like she knows now that Frankie wasn't brought out here to kind of rescue her summer, but at that moment it really felt like it did. And so it's just like a little snapshot of a perfect summer day with
absolutely
like a friend who you made a best friend. Like, to me, that is just such sheer joy.
I love it. And there was a summer in, I think it was maybe 1980, that I took classes in New York City at Parsons. And I remember going to Washington Square Park, and I guess that skating was a big thing in New York too at that time. And I remember seeing the skaters doing these beautiful like dance moves, and we would go there for our lunch and just watch people. And you really made me kind of relive that memory. So thank you. I love that. I love the skaters, and I can't imagine this book without Flo.
I know. Oh, own chapter, go with the flow. So
that's right.
That's the wonderful thing of revision. And I should also say my editor, and it's sort of one of the reasons I knew it was time to publish this book, because Kristen Gilson, who's the editor at Simon Schuster, she moved over there and she has a trans son, and she was looking for middle grade books with non-binary characters. And we had worked together on my YA books. And I had even asked her if her son would be one of my readers, and he was. And so it was just sort of this perfect coming together of like this, the right editor. And I know that Flo is also her favorite character.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'm a big fan of middle grade novels. I love this book, and I'm really looking forward to seeing your next middle grade. Do you want to talk about that more?
It's early stages, but it's set in present day, but it's also set over a summer. I like how summer can be such a time of transformation when you're that age, and just also like how magic it is to just like not have any responsibility, do things and meet people you wouldn't necessarily meet. So it's present day, it's also summertime, and that's all I got.
That's great. Well, Frankie and Bug certainly have a transformative summer and a fun-filled summer, and I encourage everyone to get this beautiful book. I want to say thanks again. I don't see any more questions, so I'll just go ahead and say thanks so much to Gayle Forman for being with us tonight. That was a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it. And I want to thank SIBA and all who attended today's event. And I want to again urge you to please consider supporting your local independent bookstore by purchasing your copy of Frankie and Bug from them.
Yay, indie bookstores. Yay.
That's right. All right. Well, I think that's about it for us, unless you had any the last things you wanted to say.
No, I just want to say to the booksellers in particular, like, talk about a lifeline during the pandemic. I released another book that was set in an indie bookstore, and I'd already been writing that one, but it was like the highlight of my week to go and like pick up my little book with like our hazmat suit on from my local indie that was still doing door delivery. And I really hope all of you have kind of made it through, with your community's understanding more than ever, just how necessary you are. So.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yes. And I'm lucky that I live in Asheville. There's so many great independent bookstores here. We have Malaprops, we have Firestorm Books, and they're just so supportive of the community, of local authors, and just bringing great books and events. So. All right. Well, thanks again, Gayle. Or did you want to say something else?
Me? No, I'm good.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. I guess that's about it for us then.
All right. Thank you.
Really wonderful talking to you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.